True Crime Screening Room is a presentation of Podcast Picks with Jim the Podcast Sherpa. Please keep in mind that some of the topics discussed might be too intense for younger or sensitive listeners. Even Jim the Podcast Sherpa conducts some of these interviews while hiding under his desk, all while holding a stuffed mountain lion named Mr. Wubby.
Welcome to True Crime Screening Room, the podcast featuring interviews with creators who dedicate their work to unraveling true crime mysteries. We're now entering the investigation room in the Sherpa Chalet to meet your host, Jim the Podcast Sherpa.
Hello there, Rebels of the Sherpalution, and welcome to True Crime Screening Room. It is a side project of Podcast Picks with Jim the Podcast Sherpa, and that would be me coming to you from Sherpaloo Studios here in the Sherpa Chalet, high atop Mount Podcaster, where I overlook millions and millions of podcasts. Obviously, by the title, you know that when we do these episodes, we feature folks who are in the true crime genre. I think I've noticed that within the last True Crime Screening Room episodes, we've kind of gone a little bit, I guess what we could call true crime adjacent, along with talking to a profiler of serial killers, an author writing about a mafia hitman, and we really go a little bit astray too with this week's guest. His name is Johnny Trevisani, super nice guy. Got to talk to him the other day. He is from the state of Pennsylvania. He has written a travel guide called The Serial Killer Travel Guide Across America. It has to do with, as you might expect, the locations where a lot of grisly murders took place. And we had a really fascinating conversation, and I liked his outlook on the book. It was a really different take, I think, on the true crime genre than what we hear from a lot of other authors. But you'll understand why as we get a little bit deeper into our conversation, but it's definitely worth listening to. So let's head into the True Crime Room and check out my conversation with Johnny Trevisani. It rhymes. We remember that. The author of The Serial Killer Travel Guide Across America. Hello there, Rebels. We are here in the True Crime Screening Room. My guest today has written a very unusual book as far as the genre of true crime is concerned, but I think it's something that I think you lovers of true crime are really going to be fascinated by. It's coming out later this year in 2025. It is called The Serial Killer Travel Guide Across America. And the author is with me right now, coming from Pennsylvania, the great state of Pennsylvania. His name is Johnny Trevisani. It rhymes, that's how we know. And he's here with us. Johnny, welcome to the show.
Thanks. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
I guess, is it an understatement to say that you have a dark sense of humor?
Yeah, I think my take on it is a little bit different than most. But yeah, I have a dark sense of humor and a little bit whimsical. That's the way I like to try to describe it.
I guess, see, the first obvious question would be, what made you want to write a book like this? This is really very unique.
Well, it is very unique. And the take on it is also unique. And that's kind of, in true crime itself, it's very serious.
Sure.
Most people take it very serious. I don't take it. I take it in a different way. So I'm going to take it a little bit different in a little lighter way. And so what got me into was Gilgo Beach. So the Gilgo Beach murders outside of Long Island. I had been to Long Island many times. So I'm outside of Philly, so I go up there and I've been there. But I've never been to Gilgo Beach, and I wasn't sure where that was. And so I did, I was like, I wonder where that is. And I looked it up and I was like, I looked at it. All right, that makes sense. Yeah, I've driven by there. Yeah. And then I thought, hey, that might be an interesting book, And so I went, hey, like have a travel guide, like a 60s travel guide. Like, hey, while you're in town, you might want to visit this area and might, see where this person did this stuff. And so I checked to see if there's anything around there like that. And there wasn't, because probably not too many people have that sense of humor. But for that take on it, and that's why I figured it might be kind of a fun project. And so I called my friend Brian, and who's who helped me with this book, and he was all in. He loved the idea, and so we went at it. So it was fun.
I think in Hollywood, outside of Los Angeles, don't they do bus tours where they have like where people died in hotels and stuff like that?
Yeah, it's called dark tourism, and there are many of these little tours. They do it on Spago Ranch for where Charles Manson was. They actually go down to Jonestown, where the Jonestown massacres. They have little things you can go down there and get a selfie in front of the Jonestown sign. But then they also have tours. Like in Philadelphia, there's actually a tour of a slight dark tourism tour that they have. Philly isn't really known for that many serial killers. We've only had a few, but I've only highlighted one in there. But other cities will do it. Like if you go to Chicago, Chicago has the famous hotel made by H.H. Holmes, which is not a hotel anymore, but it's a place that people can visit. Right. In my book, I researched a lot of these places. I researched a lot of these towns. Many of the places don't exist anymore. So let's just put that out there. Like Jeffrey Dahmer's apartment building is no longer there. It was razed, and so it's just a flat, empty park, empty lot, which they said that they would make a nice park, but they didn't. But so there isn't a lot there sometimes if you actually go and visit the actual places. But people do.
Do you cover that in the book, like the places that are no longer there? Just say, by the way, or these are really just the places that are still active?
Yeah, I tried to steer clear from many of the actual addresses. I've put areas that I know that are there that are public. Mm-hmm. But in Philadelphia, we're known for a couple. Like there's Marty Graham and there's Gary Heidnick, and those are homes. And I don't want to have people just showing up at somebody's home, right?
Right.
So I give an area. So I'm going to give an area where it is in those cases. I don't want to really.
Yeah, I know on Long Island, they have what they call the Amityville Horror House. Uh-huh. Because, the whole story was ridiculous, but
yes,
and people still drive past these people's houses.
It's one of my favorite books.
Yeah. The people that live in the house have, no connection to the murders or anything like that.
Right.
They're just there. And
people show up, right?
I remember one time I was driving by with my friend and he's like, look, the lights are on and they're watching TV. Oh, no.
Well, let's hope they are, not the spirit. Right. But yeah, so it is true. Like dark tourism is a thing. People like to travel, and I think my book is going to be more whimsical. It's going to be a little bit more fun. And I recently went out to Arizona, and I was like, hey, while I'm out here, I might want to check out a spot. And I think, that's how this might be used if you use it as a travel guide. Mm-hmm. You might, hey, if I'm going to go there, I might as well see what they have. You certainly can take a trip from, Maine down to Florida if you want.
Right.
I have it set up that way, so you can just travel down the coast. But that's if you want. It's all good.
So there weren't that many places that you were actually at, though, or were they just like a certain amount, or you went to everything?
Locally, I went. Locally, I knew places, and so in Atlantic City and such, and so pretty close to my area. And then when I was out in Arizona, I visited one. So most of these places, like I said, I just did research on.
Okay, got it. So about how many locations are there mentioned in the book?
Well, there's around 72. More than one a state, obviously.
Right.
And I don't cover all the states because, Montana is just filled with coyotes and rocks. So there's not many serial killers out there, apparently. But, there are there. Yeah, right. Yeah, that's right. The FBI will always say that there's serial killers out there. But, that's what I'm saying. And I try to highlight the compelling stories, or at least fun stories. Something that's engaging about it, right? In the book, I have what are fun facts. I have fun facts in the book about serial killers, and you think, well, what is that about? But you can find stuff.
Can you give me like a sample?
Sure. In one killer that I discovered was in Alexandria, Virginia. Now, if you've ever been to Alexandria, Virginia, it's a very quaint little city. Right? Mm-hmm. There was actually 2 serial killers in that little quaint store, in that quaint city, right? And I would never have guessed that.
Okay.
we're talking about cobblestones and, but there were two, but one of which I was really intrigued with because his name was Charles Severance. They called him the Grudge Killer. And so the fun fact is that he ran for mayor of Alexandria, and he also ran for Congress.
Oh, wow.
Now, if you ever saw a picture of this guy, he looks like, let's just say, Santa on a meth binge. Like he does not look like.
I appreciate the visual there.
Right? He's, hey, but yeah, he was an interesting dude. I just learned about him as I did my research. So I stumbled upon a number of people. Of course, you're going to have the big names, I guess, the John Wayne Gacy's and the Ed Geins and Ted Bundy's of the world highlighted in there. But as a travel guide, it's also kind of interesting to attach a serial killer to an area, right?
Right.
Because so many of them traveled state to state to state to state. So, the Green River traveled all over and Bundy traveled all over. I attributed him to the Pacific Northwest up in Washington because, that's where he went to school and he was the communications director. He was in the communications department for the election campaign of the governor. So I thought that was an interesting little fun fact for him. But he killed a lot of people in Florida, and some suspected in Utah and California as well. So where do you choose? There was one element that I wanted to include that didn't make it, but I wanted to do something called the Samuel Little Trail. So Samuel Little, of course, he was in the news in the past 10 years or so. He, prolific, I guess, as you might say, 93 people he killed. But you can trace it across the country. You can go from what point. He went all over the country. So I couldn't really attribute one spot to him. But I thought it would be an interesting map visual to say, hey, you can take the Samuel Little Trail. But that didn't make the book, but it's still the same type of thing. You can go from one spot to another.
Like you said, obviously you couldn't go to every single place. If there was a place of your choosing that you would really like to check out, given your research, was there anything that stood out more than the others? Or did you get kind of numb to it after a while?
Well, it gets kind of dark after a while, but I will say that, the alphabet murders in Rochester is really interesting. Because if you're familiar with that story, the alphabet murders, it wasn't that many. It was only three murders. But the killer, who was never identified, killed the first letter or a letter in the victim was where the body was dumped. And I would be curious to go up there and see how far things were across and try to maybe trace how it happened. Yeah, that would be interesting. Interesting about the alphabet murders was that Kenneth Bianchi was one of the suspects, and he was the Hillside Strangler. He was part of the Hillside Strangler, and I thought that was interesting because the Hillside Strangler was two people, right? And I think that so if he actually was the alphabet murder, he'd be kind of cheating on the other guy, right? Right? If you think of it, he's like, hey, he's doing it on the sly. That's not really nice. Honor among thieves.
Or among serial killers, if such a thing exists, right?
Right.
You also have another connection to the serial killer genre because you actually wrote another book called The Serial Killer Quote of the Day.
Right. So that was your first for a while. That was my first book, and that's been out for a while. And that started from a quote that I heard from Jeffrey Dahmer, and it just became a rabbit hole for me. So the quote from Jeffrey Dahmer was what he told the police when they arrived at his apartment about the odor that was coming from his apartment, because everybody was complaining about the odor that was coming from his apartment. And so he told the police, my refrigerator broke and the meat spoiled, And I thought, how gruesome of a quote is that from him? Right. Everybody knows the truth. Everybody knows that there's heads and body parts in the building, in his apartment. And he comes up with that statement. He comes up with that. And the mind that would think that up was really where I went into. So that made me go into, researching what they say and how they say it. And just the thought process. Ed Kemper is another example of that in that book. That Ed Kemper, big Ed Kemper, 6'9", 300 pounds. He has some really interesting quotes because again, it's their mind and the way that they justify and they think is really just antithetical to most people, right? But a couple quotes where he said, actually, blood is a pain in the ass. That was a quote from him because he was practicing on the co-eds that he was killing because he wanted to kill his mother in a certain way, and so his quote was, "Well, actually, blood is a pain in the ass," which I guess it is. I guess it's just a hazard, part of the hazard of being a serial killer. He also had another quote where when he took after he killed his mother, he put her vocal cords into the garbage disposal, and his quote was, "Yeah, I could still hear us talking. I could still hear her speaking." In that mind is like, he's still haunted by her, and still, even though he killed her and he did everything he wanted to do, he could still hear her talk. So I just thought that was an interesting. It was a scary and disturbing rabbit hole that I went down.
Yeah, and I think it's important to let our listeners know that you see serial killer quote of the day. This isn't like a happy motivational type of book. These are really
it could be if you're going to go down a certain dark trail, but
yeah.
I mean, I've described the travel guide as sort of like Eat, Pray, Love, but with duct tape, knives, and rope, right?
Okay. I see your point there.
Right. Right. So, the serial killer quote of the day could certainly be inspiring to those that appreciate that. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, like you said, given your sense of humor and you've got your own take on it, and and I know you're not trying to be insensitive. It's kind of like,
oh no.
It's just.
I mean, I'm not painting any serial killers in a positive way. They're gruesome, and it's what they do is gruesome. And I don't paint the victims in any in any negative fashion. I mean, what they did was awful,
right,
to them. So, but I'm just saying the take on it is like life is absurd anyway, and it's okay to just take a different perspective on it.
Yeah,
at least that's my mind, right?
Yeah, and I would think also, between even the two books, that the reader really probably gets a different kind of picture of these people. Because I'm sure, like, when people hear about these serial killers, especially the ones who love the true crime podcasts and everything like that, I get to talk to them all the time. And that one thing that is a constant is, what kind of person would do this? What is in their brain that would, lead them to, kill numbers of people for the strangest of reasons, maybe. And, and your books really kind of shine a light on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when you hear it in their own words and then you try to understand their thinking, it's not an easy. It's actually more disturbing to hear it in their words. Knowing what they did, and then because I do biographies in that book as well, so to give you a little backstory about what happens, I also do fun facts. But it was not an easy book actually to finish, if with all the dark research with it. Because,
right.
I was picking and choosing what type of quotes I wanted to use. And so when you're talking about somebody like Albert Fish, who, killed his kids and ate them, it's not an easy thing to figure out, oh, I like that quote better than the other. You know what I mean?
Right.
It gets kind of difficult. But still, it's still kind of in a light way. I mean, the whole concept of it is kind of it's light. I'm not trying to make it heavy. I mean, you know as well as I do, true crime. There's some seriously great true crime writers out there, and they go deep into the subject, and they know it, like the back of their hand, and it's very detailed, and they take it very seriously. I'm not really taking it as seriously, if you don't mind. Like, I'm just taking a different tact on it because I'm making it, making the subject a little bit more light and more fun. I do know that the quotes, or at least the comments that I have from people who get my book, they say as soon as they put it on the table, somebody grabs it and they're all looking at it. Like everybody just gravitates really quickly to it. I had somebody contact me who said that I got your book But then as soon as I took it, my son just took it. I haven't seen it for a week. Like, he just, it arrived and he lost it. So it's that kind of those types of books. It's a quick book just to to grab and pick up.
Right, and even like a lot of the other true crime authors are, they're going into the deep dive on like maybe one case where they're, they may be talking to almost anyone involved with it. As far as detectives, lawyers, victims' families, and and so on and so forth, and even maybe the killer's own family, and that I think by its own nature creates a whole different type of tone of a book as opposed to like what you're doing, where you're just saying, well, here what the facts are on this case,
right?
It's absurd and it's scary, but it's still there.
It is, and so the two can exist. There's two types of things can exist. If you want to know the details and read, I have plenty of books that I read and they're really good. I'm just trying to make a different take on it. And when I was writing it, I was kind of chuckling as I was reading it. So I was writing a book that I thought that I would like to read and enjoy. So that's the kind of vibe I'm trying to go for.
Okay. So how long did it take for you to write both of those books?
Good question. So the first book, it took me a while. It took me a while because I was researching for a number of years. But that story actually goes, like I had the book written and I had a stack of rejection letters from publishers. And I guess it makes sense, right? But then it was Brian Whitney who actually contacted me and asked me if I would be interested. And that was because I had built an online community with the same content, with that similar vibe. And I also wrote an app, and I had, I was building like this little online community in these app communities, and that helped build at least some of the vibe. So Brian contacted me and asked me if I wanted to do it, and I said, well, I have a manuscript, so that was a really easy process. This one, when I thought of this book, when I was like, well, this might be a good idea, I contacted Brian again, and he was all in. So from the start to finish of getting this book was around, let's just call it just under 2 years.
And this is for the most recent book?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And the first one, I would have to say more than 5 years.
5 years. Okay, yeah. Because obviously, you've got so many different sources, and like you said,
Right. I was looking at court records, and I was going over all those types of things with the book.
Right, and you want to cater it to the style of the book that you want to write as well, not just grabbing a factoid here and there, but really just kind of things that are going to attract the reader's attention.
Exactly, and that was also what drove this book. There are a lot of stories out there. I just want, and so how do you choose who goes where and how they would get included? I just thought the stories were good. Like the stories were compelling, and I could make it into a light version of it.
If people want to find out more about you, where should they be looking?
Well, I do have a website. You can go to johnnytrevisani.com. But the book is up for pre-order on Amazon. It comes out on August 5th. It'll hit August 5th in all formats. So I have links at my website.
Do you have any social links that people should look at?
Sure, there's social links on there too. And so, not really very active yet. I will get more active with that.
Okay.
But they're on my website, and you can go to there. So it's Johnny Trevisani, author, in Twitter and on Instagram, and and also on TikTok. No content on TikTok yet, but I plan on having it.
Okay. Yeah. Well, you're right, because that's a visual medium. Right, exactly. So you might need some spooky pictures to put up there if you're going to.
Right. I'm working with the publisher for that one. So.
Yeah, I try not to dance on TikTok either. So
right,
nobody wants to see that. Trust me.
Maybe I'm going to make up a serial killer dance. Maybe that'll be the next thing.
Do you have anything else in the works now that, or are you going to give yourself a breather?
I'm going to give myself a breather. I've been doing this for a while, and I'm sure there's going to be a lot of content and talking with wonderful people like you and such to get this out there and see where it comes to. I mean, hopefully it'll gain some legs and people have some fun with it.
Okay, so the book is called, again, The Serial Killer Travel Guide Across America. The author, right with me. Thank you so much for coming, Johnny Trevisani. Thanks so much for being on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Listen and subscribe on podcast apps everywhere. And we're on YouTube at Sherpalution. Sorry, no video. You're welcome.
Thank you so very much for spending a little time and checking out this episode of the True Crime Screening Room. And thank you so much to our guest, Johnny Trevisani. As we do with all of our authors, we are including the link to his book in the show notes. So if you are interested in checking it out, you can actually get the pre-release by going through Amazon and using that link that's right there. Next week, we will be back with a mini episode of the Sherpa Screening Room. What, Sherpa? Mini episode of the Sherpa Screening Room? I'll explain when we get there. Don't worry. You'll have to find out when you listen next week. So if you want to find out what else is going on with the show, follow us on social media on Instagram, Threads, and TikTok, where you can see my cheesy videos. And please feel free to make a comment and let me know what you think of the show. I would love to know what you think. I know you're out there. Somebody's listening. Hello. And until then, I say to you, Viva la Sherpalution.
Thanks for listening to True Crime Screening Room. Subscribe to the show on podcast apps or the Sherpalution YouTube page. Until then, stay away from evil. And more important, Viva la Sherpalution.